Okay. Right here. All right. So, I graduated from the May 2016 Reboot course, and then I went through again in the fall of 2016. So I'm a little behind on giving my story. I graduated high school and went to basic training in August 2001. I was a 92 Alpha, which is warehouse supply. In February 2002, I came back home from basic and AIT. On December, I was in the Army Reserves, and I apologize. This is an edited version because mine was too long. So if there's some gaps, you can get the full story from me later. So I was an Army Reservist. On December 21st, 2003, I received orders to report to Fort Stewart, Georgia on December 28th to deploy to Iraq. I had 7 days notice that I was deploying. I arrived at Fort Stewart on December 28th, 2003. We trained up and we deployed to Iraq from February 04 to February 05. That was OAF 2. That echo is tripping me out. Not only did I do bulk supply, I did lots and lots of convoys. We delivered fuel to different camps around Iraq. I really loved doing the convoys. As crazy as that sounds, you soldiers get it. I would volunteer to go back out versus staying working in a warehouse and driving a forklift. I learned how to drive the 5 tons, the deuce and a half, the fuel tankers, the wrecker. I drove gun truck missions. I was all in. I went to just about, I probably already said this. I went to just about every camp in southern Iraq. Everywhere we went, there were IEDs, RPGs, small arms fire, indirect fire, and mortars. While I was there, I would just pray that God would protect me. I 100% believe the reason why I'm here today is because God protected me while I was downrange. There were times when we were being mortared that I didn't know where the next incoming would land. There was one time there was a bunch of men shooting, and I really believed that I wasn't going to live to see the next day. As you become deployed for so long, when you leave there, you feel like you're leaving your comrades behind. You feel like you're leaving a piece of you behind, which you are. You feel like you need to go back over there instead of going home to your family. I came home, and of course I had changed. My high school sweetheart and I were still together after 4 years. My experience downrange changed the dynamic of that relationship. When I got home, I wasn't able to communicate very well with him or my parents. My parents said something to me. Jennifer, you were infantry? You weren't knocking down doors and trying to look for the bad guys? How could I argue with that? They were right. However, what I did do was just as dangerous, and they couldn't wrap their heads around that. Soon after being home, I was diagnosed with migraines right away, and anxiety, and possible PTSD, but no one was really throwing that out there yet in 2005. I started seeing a counselor. My counselor said something to me that stuck. You will never be able to get people to understand who have not walked in your shoes and haven't been through what you've been through. At that moment, those words changed things for me. I thought, you know what? You're right. I can explain it all day, and they will never understand. I went back to college at Ohio University, full force, and I graduated with my bachelor's in organizational communication in June 2007. My boyfriend joined active duty Army. We got married, and we moved to Fort Hood. That was in the fall of 07. Within 6 months, our marriage was on the rocks. When I would be frustrated, this pattern of drinking to cope with anger surfaced. I made bad decisions with my drinking. I convinced myself and told God that I would punish myself by divorcing my husband. We were divorced 3 months later. I had met Thomas already. He was a recruiter, and I was making up some Army Reserve time in his recruiting station. We got married August 28, 2008. Within a short time, signs of his PTSD started leaking out into our marriage. That first year of marriage, I was a contractor on Fort Hood. By this time, it was 2009, and I ETS with 8 years, good years, in the Army Reserve. I got a job at the local VA hospital, and Thomas left for a year in Korea. While Thomas was in Korea, my job got very stressful and overwhelming, and I actually lost my job. Soon after that, Thomas was blown up in Korea in a training accident with a Claymore mine. At the time, this was the first documented TBI, traumatic brain injury. He came home from Korea for 30 days convalescent leave, and then he went back. When he came home for good, we PCS to Fort Bragg. We were at Bragg from 2010 to 2012. That wasn't a good time. Thomas wasn't the same after Korea. His anger became more frequent. Destructive behaviors began, and it increased as time passed. As our world began to fall apart and crisis was setting in, we got orders for Fort Campbell. We PCS'd to Fort Campbell in October of 2012. We knew that Thomas would be deploying with the 4th Brigade Combat Team in a few months to Afghanistan. We started coming to LifePoint Church immediately after we moved in and unpacked. I started learning about Jesus in a way I had not known him before. I started reading my Bible and doing what it says. LifePoint inside joke. We joined the Fuller's Military Life Group. The first time that I had heard about Reboot was in 2013. Brian was coaching my son's soccer team. Where's he at? There you are. We had a war with words with his blue Michigan shirt and my Ohio State attire.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Go Bucks. But it was all in good fun. Brian mentioned Reboot, and a seed was planted. Thomas was deployed from April 2013 to January 2014. When he returned, he gave me his GI Bill to go to University of Tennessee to get a Master's of Science in Social Work. I began grad school in August of 14. Quickly after Thomas returned, the angry rages began. As things progressed, life got worse and worse. It was so bad. Finally, the breaking point was when Thomas got angry and left. For 3 days, I didn't know where he was or what was going on. The morning after he left, I came here to the smaller LifePoint, and all the pastors were gone. I talked to a staff person, and we were linked up with 2 different couples. They're great people, and they really tried to help us, but they didn't have the tools that we needed. We went to the Restoring Warriors Heart Retreat in May 2015. It was great, and it helped put us on the right path. At the end of the retreat, there were 2 sign-up sheets in the back. One for a couple who mentors other couples, and the other was for Reboot. As a desperate wife, I put our names on both lists. Within 1 to 2 weeks, Christy called me to set up a meeting. From then on, Thomas and I started getting mentored by Christy and Scott Thomas. We saw them 1 or 2 times a week, anywhere from 1 to 3 hours at a time. We worked really hard at bypassing all the topical issues and going deep and learning what the real issues were. They also set us on a path to growing our relationship individually with Jesus. Jenny had called me to come to Reboot. I explained to her that our schedules didn't line up at that time, but I told her I really wanted to go to one in the future, and I would jump in as soon as our schedules allowed it. She was so sweet, and she said, okay, we would love to have you. So that planted even more seeds. In August 2015, Thomas was referred to the TBI clinic. In a treatment team meeting, I learned that Thomas had about 7 or 8 TBIs along with PTSD. Through his assessments, we were able to identify the physical and mental diagnosis that explained Thomas's outward behavior. The treatment team was amazing, and they treated Thomas very well. In January 2016, I went with Thomas to the TBI Center for an appointment with his nurse case manager. At the end of that appointment, I told her that Thomas had a severe anger problem and that he needed help. I laugh now because he got angry that I said he had an anger problem. The psychologist, the nurse case manager said, you should go to the next psychologist meeting. Okay. So then we went and saw the psychologist, and she said, here's a card, go to Reboot. We began Reboot in February 2016. Within a week or two of starting Reboot, Thomas and another mentor of his met me in the parking lot as I arrived. I was informed of bad decisions Thomas had made. We had a cussing match in the parking lot. Soon, Thomas got mad and left. For the remainder of that Reboot night, I was in the parking lot going off to his mentor. When Reboot was over, I walked in and I told Brian, and Jenn was standing there, I'm sorry that I missed tonight's session. Can I get the homework? And Brian said, are you okay? And I said, no. I've been in the parking lot for the last 2 hours. He said, oh, I heard there was some yelling in the parking lot, Fort Campbell people. Even when I was angry, hurt, or upset, my goal of getting help for my family never changed. Thomas and I graduated Reboot in May 2016. Reboot helped me to understand that we cannot just look at the symptoms or the fruit on the tree. We have to identify the root issues and work on each one to bring ultimate healing to our lives. Also, I no longer use alcohol as a coping mechanism. One of my favorite sayings is that my hell was bad enough to seek God and surrender all to Him. Reboot's defining scripture, Ephesians 6:12, explains the broad picture. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. This was the answer I was looking for all along. My fight wasn't with Thomas, it was in prayer. Shortly, I graduated from UT with my master's in social work. A week after that, Thomas left for deployment. My experience as a spouse living with a soldier with PTSD and TBI has proven to be far worse than my personal experience with combat trauma. According to Charles Figley, secondary traumatic stress is the natural, consequent behaviors and emotions resulting from knowledge about a traumatizing event experienced by a significant other. It is also the stress resulting from helping or wanting to help a traumatized or suffering person. The sister book to the Combat Trauma Healing Manual is When War Comes Home, Christ-Centered Healing for Wives of Combat Veterans by Chris and Renella Adsit and Marshall Carter. This book describes secondary traumatic stress as being traumatized by his or her spouse's behavior. Thomas has been deployed for a year and will be home soon. We have come a long way, but our journey isn't over yet. My life Bible verse is this: you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Genesis 50:20. Thank you.